It's the early 1980s, and you're tired of driving around in your 1972 Oldsmobile Delta 88 with a 455. Gas prices are still relatively high, and you want something that's more fuel efficient, but still going to be comfortable and that can transport your three-person family. What are you going to shop for if you go back to the Oldsmobile dealership, especially if fuel economy is one of your top priorities? Well, for 1982, you're in luck because Oldsmobile has just introduced what's now perhaps the so-called forgotten Oldsmobile, and that is the Firenza. Yes, I said Firenza, indeed named after the Italian city of Florence. And what that has to do with a compact car, I'm not quite sure, but at least it sounds quite good, and this 1982 Firenza is relatively stylish. The Firenza represented Olds' foray into the compact, transverse-mounted engine and transmission front-wheel drive segment. It was introduced for the 1982 model year and replaced the aging rear-wheel drive Starfire in the Oldsmobile's lineup. And while the Firenza was new in Olds dealerships for 1982, GM had a number of vehicles that were introduced for the same model year that could be found in other cross-brand showrooms. More specifically, this Olds Firenza was based off of the new GM J-Car platform, which served as the underpinnings for the Chevrolet Cavalier, the Pontiac J2000, the Olds Firenza, the Buick Skyhawk, and, yes, the Cadillac Cimarron. For those of you not living in the United States, the J-Car was also badged in a number of ways overseas, including a couple popular variants, the Opel Ascona, as well as the Vauxhall Cavalier. The GMJ platform was thus truly global in nature, spawning a number of variants around the world. And its most popular variant, at least in the US, was the Chevrolet Cavalier. But of all the J platform cars, many people know about the Cavalier and the Pontiac Sunbird, which was previously the J2000 and then just the 2000. Some even know of the Buick Skyhawk. But one of the J cars just seems to fade into history and is rather forgotten, and that is the Olds Firenza, or if you happen to get a station wagon, the Olds Firenza Cruiser. Let's talk a little bit more about this fun Oldsmobile compact. As I previously mentioned, the car was introduced for the 1982 model year, and at that point, there really were just two body styles available. There was a two-door hatchback, as well as a four-door sedan, both of which you can see here on the brochure cover for the 1982 Firenza. In 1983, a third variant was added, and that was a wagon, which, as I mentioned, was called the Firenza Cruiser. Recall, this was a time period where Oldsmobile was putting the name Cruiser on anything that was a wagon variant of a particular vehicle. There was the full-size custom Cruiser that was often equipped with the Olds 307 V8 and based on the 1977 GM full-size platform introductions. And then there was also the mid-size Cutlass Cruiser based on the Cutlass Sierra. GM was employing the strategy to name everything that was a wagon variant as a cruiser, perhaps because they were trying at a similar time to also label almost every one of their vehicles as a Cutlass. This not only enabled Oldsmobile to use similar nomenclature in marketing materials, but allowed them to tout that either the Cutlass or hopefully the Cruiser would become some of the best-selling cars in the United States. I don't think the Firenza Cruiser was going to set any sales records, however. In any event, the Firenza brought to GM's compact lineup something that the X cars before it, which were introduced in 1980, including the Chevrolet Citation, Pontiac Phoenix, Oldsmobile Omega, and Buick Skylark, had brought to that particular size of vehicle, which was about one size up from the J cars. And that is transversely mounted engines and transmissions with front McPherson strut suspensions, coupled with rack and pinion steering. The cars would also receive four-coil suspension with independent suspension at least up front. Out back there was a trailing axle for rear suspension that had a stabilizer bar neatly packaged into the middle of the axle. From a technology standpoint, these J cars really were up to standard, let's say. They weren't class leading in technology, as this similar technology had been employed on a number of other vehicles, including VWs as well as Hondas before GM had introduced it to the public. That said, the cars did have the underpinnings of what would be a relatively good suspension as well as engine and transmission layout. Unfortunately, for the 1982 model year in particular, the Firenza as well as its J-car siblings came standard with a 1.8-liter inline four-cylinder engine that was carbureted and was woefully inadequate even in these 24 to 2,500 pound vehicles. This engine was in fact so bad that it lasted just 1 year in all of GM's J-car variants, and after that point in time, the Oldsmobiles and the other J-cars got either an enlarged 2.0-liter overhead valve four-cylinder or an overhead cam 1.8-liter four-cylinder underhood, and later a 2.8-liter V6, which could be had on the Firenza. Interestingly, while Pontiac and Buick would employ a turbocharger in some variants of the 1.8-liter engine, Oldsmobile never had a turbocharged 1.8-liter four-cylinder variant of the Firenza, though it did get the 2.8-liter Chevrolet V6 as an option for the 1985 model year and part of the GT package. When it came to the interiors, the Olds Firenza and the Buick Skyhawk would share similar instrument panels. Though they did have different steering wheels, the overall instrument panel, the gauges, the top pad are the same between the Oldsmobile and the Buick, and the HVAC controls and radio were shared across all J cars. Oldsmobile also employed this black plastic theme across the dashboard that wrapped into the door panels that was not employed on the Buicks. I guess it gave the Olds a distinctive look and probably saved them a little bit of money since they didn't have to make that particular piece of plastic on the IP or the elements of the door panels body color. There were a number of positive elements about these J-car interiors and the Olds Firenza interior for the 1982 model year, as well as throughout the Firenza's entire run through 1988. And that is that the seats were actually quite comfortable overall. The cars are small on the inside, and if anybody who's driven one of these J-cars can comment on one annoying thing, and that is that the wheel wells intrude into the passenger compartment. So when you're driving, there's not much space for your left foot to rest. But other than that, the seats are quite comfortable. And as I mentioned, it's quite roomy on the inside, perhaps because there's not that huge, chunky center console that is omnipresent now in today's vehicles. You aren't going to feel like you're driving a large car, though. You can stick your right arm out if you're sitting in the driver's seat and easily reach the opposing side's B-pillar. For the size, though, there is pretty good interior roominess, both front and back, and one of the surprising things about the J-cars is that the trunk space is actually quite large, at about 14 to 15 cubic feet, similar to many larger cars of the era. Another surprising feature of the time is that the GM J-cars, no matter if it's the Firenza or the other ones, are actually pretty quiet at freeway speeds. Many compact cars during this time period were quite noisy if you drove them on the freeway, almost to the point of annoyance, and that you couldn't drive them on long trips, or at least you wouldn't want to, because of the constant droning from road noise and wind noise. But these GM J cars, if they had a redeeming quality, it was certainly that their ride was relatively good, and the interior refinement was actually quite good, if not class-leading in some cases. As such, owners of Firenzas really didn't have to find themselves in a penalty box for driving the vehicle, aside from lackluster powertrains if we exclude the 2.8-liter V6. In any case, the Firenza continued on through the 1988 model year, where it received a bit of a conventional front-end refresh for that final model year. Also in that model year, the hatchback was dropped, along with the V6, just leaving the four-cylinder notchback coupe, sedan, and wagon. Over the course of its lifetime, the Firenza didn't prove a popular seller, and in 1982, just 30,000 copies were sold. Its peak year for sales was 1984, where 82,000 units were moved by Oldsmobile dealers, and in 1988, the final year, just 12,000 Firenzas were sold. In total, 282,460 Oldsmobile Firenzas made it through to customers from dealer showrooms. Overall, They were a pretty good vehicle for the time, though not necessarily class leading in a number of areas, particularly when it came to powertrain refinement as well as just overall snappiness of acceleration. But Firenzas and their J-Car platform siblings were, as I mentioned, relatively comfortable drivers, especially if you wanted to drive on the freeway for extended periods of time, did get good gas mileage, had good space on the inside, and particularly comfortable seats. If you find one and want a bit of nostalgia, I would highly recommend snapping it up, so long as you can get it for a good price. Thanks again for watching this feature on the Oldsmobile Firenza. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you.